Welcome back, Reasonauts. My name isn't important, the message is. Every day is awesome. We just have to get through it. And before we begin, if these conversations have helped you feel seen or helped you carry awareness a little more clearly, subscribe and stay with us each week. Share this with somebody who's been exhausted, trying to hold clarity inside confusing spaces. And if you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Facebook too. Not for noise, not for arguments. Just a place to keep the signal moving forward for the people still trying to understand what they've been feeling all along now. I want you to notice something. How exhausting it becomes when you start feeling responsible for correcting every distortion around you. Every misunderstanding, every contradiction, every false assumption, every conversation where something inside you quietly says, that's not actually true. And eventually, you realize something difficult. Not every distortion is asking for your intervention. Aware people struggle with this deeply because once you begin noticing patterns clearly, misalignment becomes obvious very fast. You hear contradictions immediately. You notice emotional manipulation early. You recognize performative behavior quickly. You can feel when somebody is editing themselves, protecting an image, or quietly bending reality to avoid discomfort. You watch people lie to themselves while unconsciously asking everybody around them to participate in the illusion too. And naturally, part of you wants to correct it, not always aggressively. A lot of the time, the intention is actually compassionate. You think you're helping, reducing confusion, reducing distortion, trying to bring coherence back into the room. So internally, you start thinking, if they could just see this clearly, if I explain it carefully enough, if I find the right words, if I phrase it gently enough, because aware people often believe clarity itself should create understanding, but over time, you begin realizing something uncomfortable. Clarity alone does not create readiness. You can explain something perfectly and still watch someone reject it emotionally. Not because the information lacked logic, because the nervous system was never asking for truth in that moment. It was asking for stability, and that realization changes everything, because suddenly, you understand something deeper about human beings. Not every person asking for agreement is actually asking for reality. Sometimes people are asking for emotional reinforcement, for identity protection, for confirmation that the structure they built internally doesn't need to change yet. And aware people usually learn this painfully, trying to help someone see clearly, only to realize they were never searching for clarity, they were searching for relief. And those are not always the same thing. That realization matures awareness, because eventually, you stop assuming every contradiction must immediately be corrected. You stop believing every illusion collapses through explanation, and you begin understanding something quieter, harder, more human. People often change, not when truth becomes available, but when they become emotionally capable of surviving what the truth rearranges inside them. There's a hidden exhaustion that comes from constantly trying to straighten every crooked thing around you. Most people never talk about this part because eventually, you stop simply having conversations. You start managing distortions, correcting contradictions, tracking inconsistencies, trying to hold coherence inside environments that constantly drift away from it. And that drains the nervous system fast, especially for aware people, because after interactions end, your mind often keeps going, replaying everything, what you should have said, what you didn't say, what they misunderstood, what truth got ignored, what contradiction everybody normalized just to keep the atmosphere comfortable. And slowly, you become emotionally overextended. Not because you care too much, because somewhere along the way you quietly accepted responsibility for realities that were never fully yours to manage. That's heavy, especially in a world filled with projection, defensiveness, ego protection, emotional editing, selective perception. People hearing what protects identity instead of what reveals reality. And aware people often exhaust themselves trying to bridge that gap constantly, trying to make everyone coherent, trying to make everyone honest, trying to make every room emotionally aligned. But eventually, something important has to be realized. Trying to correct everyone becomes its own form of imbalance, because now awareness stops being observation and slowly becomes control. And that's dangerous too, Because human beings cannot be forced into readiness. You cannot emotionally drag people into coherence. You cannot carry every contradiction personally. And you cannot stabilize every fractured atmosphere without eventually collapsing yourself. That realization matures awareness deeply. Because eventually, you stop asking, how do I fix every distortion I see? And you start asking, what actually belongs to my responsibility? That question changes everything, because mature awareness does not require you to become the emotional manager of the entire world. Sometimes wisdom means seeing clearly, without compulsively intervening in every fracture you notice. And honestly, learning that distinction might be the first moment your nervous system finally starts breathing again. This is where awareness starts maturing deeply. Not when you notice contradiction, not when you become perceptive, not even when you become accurate. Awareness matures when you begin questioning your own relationship to what you see. You start asking yourself, am I actually helping right now? Or am I trying to control how another person experiences reality? That question changes everything, because correction can quietly become ego too. Not loud ego, not superiority, not arrogance, protective ego. The kind that says, I need them to understand so I can finally feel settled internally. And honestly, that realization is uncomfortable, because suddenly you realize some of your urgency wasn't entirely about helping. Sometimes it was your nervous system trying to reduce the discomfort of unresolved contradiction. You wanted coherence restored because the tension itself felt emotionally unbearable to carry. That's human. But life doesn't always resolve immediately. People do not evolve on command. Truth does not bloom on schedule. Awareness does not force awakening. And eventually, aware people learn something humbling. You cannot force coherence into another human being. You can invite it, model it, protect it, live it, create conditions where honesty becomes safer. But you cannot emotionally drag another nervous system into readiness before it actually arrives there. And trying to do so usually creates resistance anyway. Because forced realization often feels like psychological threat instead of liberation. That realization softens people, not into passivity, into wisdom. You stop trying to control every outcome. You stop needing everyone to get it immediately. You stop attaching your peace to whether another person accepts reality right now. And instead, you begin focusing on something steadier. Your own coherence, your own integrity, your own alignment. Because eventually, you realize something profound. The most powerful form of truth is not always correction. Sometimes it's embodiment, living so coherently that reality becomes visible through your presence without needing force constantly attached to it. That is awareness becoming mature enough to stop fighting every wave and start moving with deeper rhythm instead. You've probably felt this before. Walking into a conversation and almost immediately realizing, this room does not actually want honesty, not fully. Maybe they wanted validation, maybe emotional comfort, maybe reassurance, maybe agreement, maybe performance, but not truth. And aware people often struggle deeply in those environments because your instinct naturally moves toward clarifying, refining, aligning, reducing distortion. You feel contradiction and immediately want coherence restored, not necessarily to dominate anyone. Sometimes just so reality can breathe again. But eventually, life teaches something difficult. Some environments depend on distortion to remain emotionally stable. That realization is hard to accept at first because part of you still believes, if something is false, surely people want clarity, but not always. Sometimes people want familiarity more than truth, comfort more than accuracy, emotional protection more than transformation, identity preservation more than coherence, because clarity can be disruptive. Truth reorganizes people internally, and many nervous systems would rather maintain a familiar illusion than face the emotional instability that honesty might initially create. That's why some conversations feel impossible, not because your perception lacks validity, but because the environment itself is emotionally structured to resist disruption. Once you understand that deeply, something changes inside you. You stop exhausting yourself trying to force awakening inside closed systems. You stop treating every contradiction like a battle you're personally responsible to fix. You stop believing that more explanation automatically creates more openness, because eventually, awareness matures enough to recognize some people are not asking what is true, they are asking what allows me to remain emotionally intact right now. And those are not always the same question. That realization doesn't make you cynical. It makes you wiser about energy, about timing, about emotional capacity. And honestly, one of the healthiest things aware people can learn is this: not every room deserves your full explanatory effort. Some systems are not ready for clarity. Some conversations are not invitations, and some atmospheres must first become safe enough before truth has anywhere stable to land. A lot of aware people learn this pattern very early, as children, long before they understood psychology, long before they had language for nervous systems, trauma, or emotional regulation. Maybe you became the peacemaker, the emotional translator, the one who noticed tension first, the one trying to stabilize the atmosphere before things escalated. You learned how to read rooms quickly, how to anticipate reactions, how to smooth conflict, how to explain misunderstandings, how to emotionally manage environments before they became unsafe. And over time, correction became psychologically linked to safety. If I can just get everyone aligned, maybe the room calms down. If I explain it clearly enough, maybe conflict stops. That creates hyper-responsibility, because now your nervous system starts believing it's my job to hold emotional coherence together. And honestly, a lot of adults are still carrying that pattern right now, trying to regulate entire environments through explanation, clarification, over-functioning, constant correction, trying to keep everyone emotionally stable by managing the atmosphere themselves. And that becomes exhausting, because eventually you realize something painful. Some systems stay chaotic, not because nobody explained reality clearly, but because chaos itself became normalized inside the structure. Some families normalize instability, some relationships normalize tension, some environments normalize contradiction. Some people are emotionally organized around confusion itself, and no amount of explanation alone can reorganize a system that unconsciously depends on dysfunction to maintain familiarity. That realization changes aware people deeply, because eventually you stop asking, how do I fix every emotional atmosphere? And you start asking, why did my nervous system believe this was my responsibility in the first place? That question matters, because awareness without boundaries often creates emotional overfunctioning, but mature awareness begins recognizing something gentler. You are allowed to witness instability without becoming its permanent regulator. You are allowed to care deeply without assigning yourself responsibility for every room staying emotionally intact. And honestly, for some people, that realization feels like breathing for the first time in years. No tension now. Just the emotional weight of learning something difficult about people. This part is hard, really hard. There are moments in life where people will misunderstand you, and correcting them will cost more energy than the misunderstanding itself. That realization hurts deeply for aware people, because clarity matters to you, accuracy matters, alignment matters. You naturally want things to be understood correctly, to feel coherent, to feel true. So when somebody sees you inaccurately, part of your nervous system immediately wants to explain, clarify, refine the perception, correct the distortion, not even for ego sometimes, just because internal coherence matters deeply to you. But maturity teaches something difficult. Not every misunderstanding requires defense. That lesson changes people profoundly, because eventually, you realize something uncomfortable. Some people are committed to a version of you that helps preserve their emotional narrative. And no amount of explanation changes that, not because you failed to communicate clearly, because their perception is emotionally functional for them. Sometimes people need you to be the villain, or the difficult one, or the cold one, or the selfish one, because that interpretation protects the story they need to maintain internally. And aware people can destroy themselves trying to manage those perceptions endlessly, trying to explain harder, clarify better, defend themselves perfectly, control how they're seen in every room by every person all the time. But eventually, something shifts. You realize you can spend your entire life managing perception, or you can quietly remain coherent without requiring universal agreement. That's discipline, especially in a world obsessed with image management, public perception, emotional positioning, being interpreted correctly at all times. The modern world teaches people to constantly monitor how they appear externally, but mature awareness begins prioritizing something deeper: inner coherence. Because eventually, you realize something freeing. People misunderstanding you does not automatically mean you abandon truth, and people approving of you does not automatically mean you remained aligned either. That changes your nervous system slowly. You stop chasing complete control over interpretation. You stop emotionally collapsing every time somebody projects onto you inaccurately, and instead, you begin anchoring yourself in something quieter: integrity, consistency, coherence. The ability to remain internally aligned, even when external perception fluctuates. And honestly, that kind of peace cannot be manufactured through performance. It only appears when your nervous system finally stops trying to manage every pair of eyes in the room. There's a specific kind of strength that develops in aware people over time, a quieter strength. The ability to notice distortion and not immediately react to it. Not because you became passive, not because you stopped caring, because you became measured. You stop confusing urgency with wisdom that changes everything. Because eventually, aware people begin realizing some truths do not need argument. Reality reveals them eventually. Some people do not need correction. They need consequence. Some lessons cannot be intellectually downloaded. They have to be emotionally lived through. And once you truly understand that, your nervous system starts calming down. Because now, you are no longer trying to verbally force realizations that life itself is already preparing to teach. That's a profound shift. You stop over-explaining constantly. You stop chasing every contradiction. You stop trying to drag awareness into rooms that emotionally resist it, and instead, you begin respecting process, timing, trajectory, the natural unfolding of consequence and realization that creates calm, not apathy. Calm. Apathy says, I don't care. Mature awareness says, I understand that forcing this will not create readiness. That distinction matters deeply because aware people often burn themselves out trying to accelerate everyone else's awakening, trying to make realization happen now, trying to collapse emotional timelines through explanation alone. But life has rhythms, growth has rhythms, truth has rhythms too. And once you begin trusting that, your nervous system softens. You stop feeling personally responsible for controlling every unfolding around you. You begin understanding. Reality moves people eventually. Patterns reveal themselves eventually. Consequences introduce clarity eventually. And sometimes, the wisest thing you can do is simply remain coherent while life finishes teaching what words alone could not. That's maturity. Not becoming numb, not abandoning truth, learning when truth needs your voice, and when truth is already moving through the structure of reality itself. Let's be honest about something else too. Being the person who notices everything can quietly become isolating, especially when you slowly become the listener, the observer, the emotionally regulated one, the grounded one, the one carrying perspective, the one trying not to escalate situations. People start unconsciously leaning on your awareness, not always maliciously, sometimes naturally. Because emotionally aware people often become stabilizers inside systems. You become the translator, the calming presence, the one who sees both sides, the one who absorbs tension without immediately exploding, the one who keeps rooms functional. And eventually, you realize something painful. Nobody's really checking whether you're tired, because when someone becomes the strong one, people quietly stop imagining they need support too. That happens constantly to aware people. You become emotional infrastructure without even realizing it. The stabilizer, the mediator, the nervous system regulator for entire environments, and after a while, that role becomes exhausting because internally, part of you keeps watching preventable suffering repeat itself. The same cycles, the same blind spots, the same collapses, the same contradictions, the same emotional injuries people refuse to address honestly, and correction becomes tempting because part of you is tired. Tired of watching people walk into walls you already saw from far away. Tired of watching relationships fracture through avoidable distortion. Tired of watching pain repeat itself through unconsciousness. But awareness eventually has to learn boundaries too, because no human being can sustainably carry every emotional reality around them. You cannot become responsible for every lesson, every realization, every collapse, every person's growth process. That's not wisdom. That's collapse waiting to happen. And honestly, a lot of aware people burn themselves out trying to become emotional life support systems for everyone around them, trying to stabilize rooms while privately destabilizing themselves, trying to carry peace externally while quietly losing rest internally. But mature awareness learns something gentler. You are allowed to care deeply without becoming responsible for everybody's evolution. You are allowed to step back from emotional overfunctioning. You are allowed to stop translating reality constantly for people committed to misunderstanding it. And maybe the deepest lesson is this: your awareness was never meant to imprison you inside permanent responsibility. It was meant to help you move through reality clearly, while still remaining human enough to rest inside your own life too. You've probably witnessed this before too. Watching someone reject truth repeatedly, only to arrive at it later through pain. And honestly, that can be heartbreaking. Because sometimes you saw the outcome early, you felt the trajectory. You noticed the pattern. You could already sense where the behavior was leading. The relationship, the burnout, the collapse, the betrayal, the emotional consequence forming slowly underneath the surface. And part of you wanted to stop it. Not to control them, because you cared. Because watching preventable suffering hurts aware people deeply, especially when your nervous system already sensed the future direction before the other person consciously recognized it. But they weren't ready, and life itself had to become the teacher instead of you. That's difficult emotionally, because aware people often struggle watching reality unfold slowly when they already recognize the trajectory early. But eventually, that experience teaches something important. Awareness does not grant ownership over another person's path. That realization changes people profoundly. Because once you understand it deeply, you stop trying to emotionally force evolution. You stop believing your clarity automatically grants authority over another person's timing. And you begin recognizing something humbling about human beings. People arrive at truth differently. Some through reflection, some through repetition, some through collapse, some through suffering. Some only after consequences become undeniable emotionally. And no amount of explanation can replace lived realization for certain people. That's hard to accept sometimes, especially when love is involved, especially when you can already see what someone else still refuses to acknowledge. But maturity slowly teaches restraint, not indifference, restraint. The ability to recognize I can care deeply without interfering with every unfolding. Because not every lesson can be prevented externally. Some truths must become experiential before they become integrated, and aware people eventually learn one of the hardest lessons of all. Seeing the trajectory early does not always mean you are meant to stop the journey itself. Sometimes your role is simply to remain coherent, while reality teaches what words alone never could. That's maturity. Not abandoning people, respecting that growth has its own timing, its own process, and sometimes its own necessary pain. Let me ask you something, gently. Where in your life have you become exhausted, trying to correct realities other people are still committed to misunderstanding? And deeper than that, have you mistaken responsibility for control? Because awareness does not require you to carry every distortion into battle. Sometimes wisdom looks like restraint, boundaries, quiet coherence, letting reality teach what words cannot. If you've ever felt exhausted from constantly trying to explain, clarify, translate, correct, or stabilize the people around you, there's nothing wrong with you. Awareness naturally wants alignment. It naturally moves toward coherence, toward clarity, toward reducing distortion. That's part of what awareness does. But maturity eventually teaches something deeper. You cannot force growth. You cannot drag people into readiness. You cannot verbally rescue every unfolding. And honestly, trying to do so can slowly damage your own peace, because eventually your nervous system becomes trapped in constant management, monitoring, correcting, anticipating, stabilizing, carrying emotional realities that were never meant to live entirely on your shoulders. And maybe your next stage isn't becoming less aware. Maybe it's learning discernment, learning where your energy actually belongs, what is truly yours to carry, what requires language, and what life itself is already speaking loudly enough through consequence that changes awareness completely. Because now, you stop reacting compulsively to every contradiction you notice. You stop believing your peace depends on correcting every distortion around you. You stop exhausting yourself trying to manage the emotional evolution of entire rooms, and instead, you begin stewarding yourself more wisely. That's the discipline. Not silence from fear, not passivity from weakness, conscious restraint, measured movement. The ability to remain coherent without becoming consumed. The ability to care deeply without emotionally over-owning everyone else's path. The ability to speak truth without needing control attached to it. That's evolution. Because awareness matures the moment it realizes clarity alone is not wisdom, stewardship is. And maybe real growth is not becoming louder, but becoming calm enough to know when your voice is needed, when silence carries more wisdom, and when reality itself is already teaching what no explanation could accelerate anyway. That is the movement, that is the shift, that is the reason our journey. Take a breath. Let your nervous system loosen its grip for a moment. If you've been carrying the burden of correcting everyone lately, maybe the exhaustion you feel isn't failure. Maybe it's the cost of trying to hold clarity for too many people at once. Dedicated to those who spent years believing they could save people through explanation. The ones who kept translating truth again and again, hoping the right combination of words would finally make someone see clearly. And to those now learning that some truths cannot be handed to people. Some things must be discovered personally, lived personally, felt deeply enough that the realization becomes their own. If this episode resonated with you, subscribe and stay with us each week. Share it with somebody who's tired of carrying the emotional labor of trying to fix every room they enter. And if you want to continue the conversation, you can find us on Facebook too. Not for noise, not for arguments, not for performance, just to keep the signal moving forward for the people still trying to learn how to stay aware without becoming emotionally consumed. Next time, we step into another difficult strength, the power of not needing to win. Because some people argue to dominate, but others learn how to remain grounded without needing to conquer every disagreement. And that changes the entire atmosphere. Every day is awesome. We just have to get through it. I'll see you in episode 20.